Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Alvaro Villagran. I am a program manager at the Shared Use Mobility Center, and I will be your host for today's event. On behalf of the Shared Use Mobility Center, I would like to welcome everybody to this virtual event. We're glad to see there's people join us from different parts of the US and the world, and we hope your families and communities are well and safe in the context of the coronavirus pandemic. Today, we're convening here to participate in the Mobility Hubs to Connect Communities webinar and workshop event. SUMC is excited to host you today for this first webinar in the series of events in the path to the Shared Mobility Summit. Soon, you will be receiving details about our next event, which is a State Transportation and Climate Policy scheduled for November 20th, which is a follow-up from our event on climate workshop during the 2020 summit. We also invite everybody to mark your calendars and save the date for the 2021 Shared Mobility Summit to be hosted virtually on April 14 to 16 of 2021. So for today's event, the agenda includes two parts. The first part of the event is a webinar where you're going to be learning about SUMC's work pioneering on mobility hubs, as well as from 4 remarkable examples on mobility hub planning and implementation in the United States and in Europe. We invite you all to submit your questions and comments for speakers using the chat box and the Q&A box that are located at the bottom of your Zoom window. The second part of this event is going to be an interactive meetings with breakout rooms. You will be joining that meeting using a link that has been sent via email, and we will be providing that same link in the chat box and in this presentation at the end of the presentation, so you can access directly. So these meeting rooms are going to be, we're going to contain 4 breakout rooms. Are going to be hosted by the speakers of this webinar and SUMC staff that will facilitate the conversations. At the end of these 30 minutes conversations in breakout rooms, this SUMC staff will be sharing some of the takeaways from each of the breakout rooms, so everybody gets to live with the highlights of the discussion at each room. So very briefly, before we hear from our speakers, would like to poll 2 brief questions to the audience. So the first question that should be popping up on your screen is, what mobility hub issues are you most interested in learning about today? This is a multiple choice question, so you can check all the boxes that apply to your main interest. And then if you scroll down on the poll box, you will find the second question, which is, what is your current involvement with mobility hubs? So we want to hear if you're just learning about it, if you're doing research, if you're working as a consultant for a project, or if you're in the process of planning, designing, implementing, or operating a mobility hub. So I'll give you here 30 seconds, everybody, to respond to these 2 brief questions. Let's see, we have the answers back. Okay, 10 more seconds so everybody can provide your input. Okay, we're gonna close the poll now. Let's see the results. Have it. There you go. So for level of interest, we're seeing that 65% are interested in multimodal integration, which is a big component of mobility hubs. And then community engagement, hub location and design, and partnerships come next as the most voted answers. And then we see that most people here in the audience are interested in learning or researching about mobility hubs, which is aligned with the goal for today's webinar. So I'm gonna move forward and I'm gonna introduce you the 5 amazing speakers that we have for today's event. First, we're gonna start with Sharon Feigon, who's the founder and executive director of the Shared Use Mobility Center. Next, we're gonna hear from Danielle Kochman, who is a mobility planning manager at the San Diego Association of Governments, following by Jasna Hadzic-Stanek, who is a transportation planner with the city of Minneapolis. Then Joy Massey, who's a program manager at Transform in California. And finally, we're gonna hear from Rebecca Karbaumer, who is the Sustainable Mobility Project Coordinator of the city of Bremen in Germany. So without further ado, Sharon, I invite you to present.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, or perhaps evening even. Welcome again to the webinar talking about one of our favorite topics, mobility hubs. So as Alvaro said, I'm going to give you just a very, very brief overview of the Shared Use Mobility Center and what we do, and then a little bit of our history with mobility hubs and kind of a couple thoughts about them. And then we'll get into the current activities going on with mobility hubs. So next slide. Alvaro, can you? Yeah, okay, great. So this is our graphic that describes the Shared Use Mobility Center. As you may know, we're a nonprofit. We work in the public interest. We got started back in 2014, at the beginning of 2014, and we're dedicated to achieving equitable, affordable, and environmentally sound mobility across the US through the efficient sharing of transportation assets. And we work with the, we promote collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, and our community partners. And we do this through piloting programs, conducting applied research, and providing policy and technical expertise to cities and regions. And our whole mission is to seek mobility for all. And these are just some examples of some highlights of our work. We work closely with the FTA Research Office. We also work with Clean Mobility Options, which is a program in the state of California that focuses on disadvantaged communities throughout the state. And we are working on capacity building strategies and technical assistance for innovative projects. And our big thing right now is that we're about to launch the Accelerating Mobility Innovation National Network. And this will include more peer-to-peer learning, practitioner workshops, and knowledge sharing, and it will be open to transit agencies, to city DOTs, to MPOs, to community organizations, and we're really going to be able to expand our network. And then the slides you see on the right of your screen are from our Learning Center, where we try to document everything that we are learning, and we also can share tools in there for learning about CO2 emissions, for mapping your communities and other activities as well. So next slide, please. So what I was going to talk about very briefly is just our history with mobility hubs. And the illustration on your left dates from 2008, when we had a vision for mobility hubs in the Chicago area. And this was work that I did as part when I was CEO of IGO car sharing. So it was a vision from a car share operator. And the idea was a multi-purpose use of assets. So a solar canopy to provide shelter, as well as to power the chargers for electric car share cars and co-located with transit, and signage to explain how everything works. And also we worked on a joint smart card to bring together transit and car sharing. And it was the first integration in North America. So the pictures you see on the right are the actual projects that got built. It took about 5 years. And I would say the important lesson, one of the important lessons, was that the stakeholders and partners and really working well with them was key to getting to where we got to. So the next slide, please. We took this learning from this early work and looked to how do we bring that into the Shared Use Mobility Center. And so some of the first work we did was we started continuing that work with LA and Seattle and bringing together a diverse set of stakeholders in government, in business and community to really imagine what could be possible for mobility hubs. And I think innovation and creativity are a key part of creating mobility hubs. They can be so many different things, and both LA and Seattle have evolved and changed in their work on these topics. And then SUMC went to Europe on a study trip, and that report that you see there is available. And it's really our experience and our learning from what was going on in Europe with mobility hubs. And of course, today we're going to hear directly from Bremen, Germany. And then the mobility hub booklet that's shown there is from our work in the Twin Cities. And I think what's important about that document is it shows different typologies and the idea that mobility hubs need to be different in different settings and different communities. Next slide, please. And then SUMC has continued to work with partners to imagine and plan mobility hubs that are community appropriate. And we put this slide in here just to show you that not only have we done work in a lot of different places, but that the stakeholders and the community partners are such an essential part of making these projects successful. And then the Indigo example is there because obviously funding is also critical. And Indigo, who was we worked with through our FTA on-ramp program, they became one of the first agencies to dedicate funding for mobility hubs as part of their transit agency capital plan. And so they're working toward implementation at this time. And with that, can we go to the next slide? From this work that we've done, this is kind of the definition that I like to throw out about mobility hubs, that they're the physical manifestation of the trip planning app that we're all becoming familiar with. Plus, I really believe that the secret sauce is the opportunity to create community and a learning environment for using new travel options. If this is done right, and if it really gathers that needs assessment and partnership engagement. Thank you. And now we'll go on to the rest of the presentations.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Danielle Kochman, and I am the Mobility Planning Manager at SANDAG. Oh, I need to share my screen. Sorry about that. In the mobility planning section, we have two sections. We have mobility hub implementation, and then also pilots and partnerships, which, are two groups that work very closely together. And we've been working on mobility hub planning for quite some time, developing strategies, visual simulations, really to help stakeholders imagine a different travel experience that can be enabled by mobility hubs, and also the placemaking as well that comes along with it. And so I'm going to run you through a lot of those visual simulations today, and I am only supposed to have 7 minutes, so I'm going to try to run through them pretty quickly. But first, to kind of introduce you to how we are thinking about mobility hubs at SANDAG, we've developed a regional network of mobility hubs. And the idea is that if you have mobility hubs throughout the region, we can really enable multimodal transportation and make alternative transportation options real and competitive to driving alone in our region, a very auto-dependent region currently. And so what we imagine is at these mobility hubs that we would have shared mobility services, features, and amenities that allow multimodal travel to be competitive by either accessing high-speed, reliable, frequent transit services, or also enabling connections between mobility hubs, or as we like to call it, hub hopping. So here you see with our regional proposed mobility hub network, we have categorized a number of different types of mobility hubs. We have the gateway mobility hubs at the edges of our region, at the border region, through the border crossings at Tijuana, to really kind of access from outside the region. We have our major employment centers, our suburban mobility hubs, urban mobility hubs, which would all, look a little bit different. And then coastal, we have a lot of beach communities in our region. And so there's different kind of user needs there as well. So thinking about how our mobility hubs can kind of fit the needs of those different communities and different trip types. So this is our biggest employment center, Sorrento Valley, and this is a visual simulation that we developed for the Sorrento Valley station. And you can see it's very exciting. If you're probably most of you are not familiar with what it looks like today, but despite being a very large employment center for the San Diego region, it's pretty dispersed and not walkable. And so we, are imagining a lot of different mode services in the future that can help kind of make it a more people-friendly and multimodal place to access. And then this is down at the border region at the San Ysidro border, which is the busiest land border crossing in the United States. We currently have the light rail trolley that goes there, and we have a significant ridership crossing the border and getting on the trolley to access downtown and other parts of the region. And so figuring out how we can better kind of bridge some of those gaps and serve those people that are crossing the border with additional amenities. You can see new bike lanes and really kind of a sense of place. And then finally, this is another one of our gateway mobility hubs in the mobility hub network in El Cajon for people that would be accessing from East County. We have a lot of rural areas out there. And so imagining kind of, it's a little bit of a smaller community, but what that might look like. And then in the north, we have also the Oceanside Transit Center where people would be accessing our county from Orange County. And we also have a major military installation directly adjacent. And so this is what the platform looks like today and what we imagine the platform would look like with the amenities to really kind of make alternative transportation viable for a lot of the people using it and convenient. And then, of course, the mobility hub doesn't require just improvements at the station itself, but we need to have improvements throughout the community so people can get to the station itself. And so we have here Mission at Nevada, which is part of the downtown Oceanside area. It's a 5-minute bike ride or a 10-minute walk to the major transit station. And this is what we imagine what it could look like with, improved densification, some more kind of placemaking, and then a bunch of shared mobility services and options. So we have been working a lot on transitioning from planning to implementation over the last few years. And determining, how we make that transition and what we've been doing is really relying on partnerships with both public and private entities to fund some of these mobility hub features, and also partnering with public agencies to do pilots, figuring out, how we can really allocate our space in a flexible way, not just for the shared mobility services and features that we need today, but as, everything continues to evolve, how can we, be able to quickly react to new needs, new technologies that are available, and new trends in transportation. And then, how do we continue to monitor progress and performance, and how do we measure that? Really focusing on access. And so, in the short term with implementation, we are in the process of building right now a light rail extension. And there are, we developed a mid-coast mobility hub strategy for each of the stations on this light rail extension that we're expecting to open in about a year. We developed a comprehensive mobility hub strategy. Now because the project was already in construction when we were developing the mobility hub strategy, we weren't able to implement a lot of it as part of the trolley construction. However, we have gotten some small wins working with our engineering team. So some additional pickup drop-off zones, some additional kind of EV charging locations and things like that. We've been able to incorporate some of these elements and features into the actual construction of the project. So we're excited to see some of those happen. And then we're also partnering with the city to figure out, where we can incorporate some of these improved, bike access, bus access in the vicinities around the station and the communities to access the station. And this is just to get you a feel of the different kinds of stations that we have along the light rail extension. The last image you saw had a parking lot with a bunch of services and space for services, but here at this station, it's on the campus of UC San Diego, and there isn't a parking lot. There's not a lot of space, which is great for encouraging alternative transportation, but trying to incorporate all these different services and amenities is a little more constrained. And finally, just kind of, I think my message here is that with implementation, looking for kind of small wins that we can have along the way, because, mobility hubs are multimodal and our funding sources are traditionally mode specific. So it's difficult to build, such a comprehensive multimodal project. So how can you make small shifts along the way and at some point down the future have that really kind of comprehensive vision that we're seeing? So with the pandemic, we were supposed to have Bike to Work Month in May, and we had some funding that was allocated for that. And with the pandemic, that wasn't going to happen anymore. And we were able to quickly respond and reuse that funding to do shared streets pilots. And so we worked with our jurisdictions, and they created some temporary spaces for people to bike, walk, and play. And so that's been successful in looking at how we can pivot to make that a longer term effort, and potentially partnering with our jurisdictions on some more, innovative ways, potentially a grant program to implement some new TDM strategies that can help support the mobility hub strategy that we have. So that wraps up my portion of the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass things over to Jasna.
Jasna, you're muted.
There we go. Thanks for that. So thank you, Alvaro, and to the Shared Use Mobility Center for the opportunity to be here with you all today to share some of the work that we've been doing in Minneapolis over the past several months. So first, I am going to start, just a moment. I'm going to start with a little bit of background before getting into the pilot that we've been doing this year. So through the Twin Cities Shared Mobility Collaborative and a 2019 regional workshop, we really started to build foundation for what mobility hubs could look like on a regional scale. And at the same time, we started to build some awareness and excitement around this very new concept. Having set that vision for what mobility hubs could look like on a regional level and some preliminary locations through the workshop, as a next step, we started working to identify potential mobility hub sites through an equity-driven data analysis, which placed all of our initial mobility hub sites in areas of concentrated poverty, where 50% or more of residents are people of color and 40% or more residents are living below the poverty line. What I really want to point out here, although I'm highlighting data, is that really it was what was a useful lens in order to solidify some of these locations was taking out these data-driven locations to the community and doing community engagement ahead of the implementation. So that really played a key role in our final site selection. The way we define mobility hubs here in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities is very on par with the national and regional definition as a place where people connect to multiple modes of transportation. However, I would like to say that 2020 really challenged this definition, and I will talk about that in a minute. So since we had that regional workshop, we had our initial sites that were confirmed through community engagement. We really set out to do a quick and dirty pilot in 2019 at 12 locations. Our main goal was to incorporate colorful and identifiable elements, such as the modular blue boxes that you see on the left, that could be adaptable to many different contexts, but mainly provided the function of seating and framing that mobility hub site. We also incorporated some multilingual signage and wayfinding that you see in the middle. And what was really critical is making sure that these spaces are activated through social and programming aspects. In 2019, we added some scooter and bike parking infrastructure because of our scooter lock-through requirement. And we are right now in the process of piloting some smart lockers that are meant to be used for short-term sharing, delivery, and pickup, as well as storage, kind of similar to the modes. These will serve a similar purpose. So a lot of the themes have started to emerge, especially this year as we've been working on this, and I've tried to distill these down into 5 themes that I would like to share with you. When we initially started to plan for the second year of the pilot for 2020, as everyone else here, we never could have imagined what 2020 would have in store. Initially, at the beginning of the pilot, we wanted to expand the defined use of the Mobility Hub app beyond the place where people connect to modes, but really bringing services and public health information to these communities since they are in areas of concentrated poverty. So we wanted to make people connect them to essential services and information. And so we started coordinating with our health department and food sustainability group. And then on May 25th, George Floyd was killed at the curb in our very own city. And what followed was a period of civil unrest and calls for racial justice. So what really started happening is our streets started to take on a whole different meaning as people marched, calling for racial justice. Our parking lots and vacant lots turned into food distribution centers as communities rallied together. And really a lot of these essential services became inaccessible or closed down. Communities kind of became that driving force in helping each other out. So taking a similar approach, we decided to pivot our pilot initially with COVID and now with this tragic event. So we took a similar approach and wanted to actively provide a platform to partner with people in the neighborhoods where these pilots are taking place. At the same time, we were lucky to receive a NACTO grant, which enabled us to create an engagement plan that was rooted in partnerships with organizations, neighborhoods, and individuals who are in their communities. And we also developed an ambassador pilot program, which brings me to my next theme of safety. So during last year's engagement, since we were able to kind of do a quick dirty pilot and do some engagement with that, we were able to collect some information. And what we heard is that one of the main important themes that came out for people was really feeling safe in a mobility hub. For some people, this meant infrastructure safety. So this year we worked with our Vision Zero program to incorporate some intersection safety improvements. Some were first hardened center lines that we installed on a state road. on county roads and such, and some other bikeway improvements. But then for other people, this really meant personal safety. So we were really excited to be able to test out an ambassador pilot program to test community-based approach to safety by having human presence at these sites that someone can talk to or ask questions. And then also we wanted to start building that capacity in neighborhood-rooted individuals, organizations who would be carrying out this work. Another key theme that emerged from previous engagement is people wanted to have more places to sit and gather. So it really became about reclaiming that what was initially a car space for people places. And this example here, we closed down a right turn or a slip lane near our downtown area and turned it into a temporary mobility hub. And what's really reaffirming is when we get feedback or emails like this one from someone thanking us for creating that a particular space, and they were able to use that and decompress before starting the first day on their new job. So it's really great to receive some of this feedback. On that same note, I'm also going to add, I never realized how much a little blue box can be such a contentious and hot topic. But seating is very contentious. These blue boxes have been moved, taken away, some even never returned by adjacent property owners. And it really says a lot about community policing and how some of these property owners view public spaces and activities that occur there based on who's using them. So what's really important here is having a common understanding what the public right-of-way is, who owns it, and who has access to it. And this is one of those things that we are continuing to grapple with in terms of how public spaces are viewed and used. What we did from the beginning is we started to create a strong brand and visual identity for the project that could be scaled up to a regional level. In addition to the modular furniture, the colorful furniture I shared, we also had some wayfinding, like I mentioned, but also what we did this year is we created some messaging through art that really resonates with the community. So really signage and art that's hip and cool and that community will want to have out there at these physical sites. And last but not least, I just want to briefly touch on partnerships, though this is a topic I could spend an hour on alone. Partnerships have really enabled us to do a pilot, test it out, learn from it. We worked with a slew of partners from public agencies where we had to install some of these hubs adjacent to county or state property. I do also have our very own logo, City of Minneapolis, here for many reasons. One is it took a lot of coordination just to get the permitting and everything right to get this moving quickly. But at the same time, it also really helped us identify barriers to piloting new concepts that can hopefully inform future pilots. And then on the private company side, our close working relationship with Nice Ride Lyft enabled us to ask them to relocate some of their bike share elements to essential services such as grocery stores where we saw a greater need and where we decided to do a larger hub this year. And last but not least, I do want to give a shout out to our pilot consultant, the Musican Group, who have done a tremendous job working with us for 2 years on this project and have brought such a creative lens to this work. In terms of what comes next, so we are at a pivotal moment right now where we are asking ourselves, when do we take this from pilot to permanent? So in order to make it a permanent program, we really need to develop a capital program and identify long-term funding. Right now, our funding is very much piecemeal, as you saw on the previous slide. We are also working to integrate this with our electric charging network and car sharing system, a microtransit pilot that will be happening next year, and mobility as a service, which will have a low income program eligibility improvement to it. But I also want to point out that we also want to remain flexible and leave room for things and modes that are yet to come without really defining everything. We know that there's going to be future modes that we don't know of yet and future elements that we'll need to incorporate. And with that, this is my contact information and website to our Mobility Hub work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasna. We move next to Joy's presentation.
Hello, everyone. Making sure to unmute myself. Pull up my presentation.
Take advantage of this time to remind everybody, if you have questions, please submit it through the Q&A box located at the bottom. It could be a general question or general question specific for speaker.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Joy Massey. I am a program manager at Transform. We are a Bay Area, California-based nonprofit that's focused on transportation and housing advocacy. And today I will highlight some learnings and an approach that Transform, as well as other partners, are taking to implement a pilot project in which the name is Car Sharing and Mobility Hubs at Affordable Housing Pilot. This builds really nicely on the two presentations before me, because this is really a community approach to the design of mobility hubs. And so we are really still in the design semi-implementation phase, if you will, as we have some implementation services for our mobility hubs in place, but our approach is a little different because we've taken some time to really engage the communities in which we're working in and piloting a different approach. So you'll hear me refer to this project, I think, moving forward as mobility hubs, but know that we are working within a specific region for each of our locations. So more about the actual project. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Transform received a grant from the California Air Resources Board to design and implement mobility hubs in 3 different affordable housing developments in the Bay Area, in the cities of Richmond, San Jose, and Oakland. As you can see on my screen, each of the sites vary from population size to demographics to their various transportation needs and also access to transportation services. So the project team often refers to this project as a pilot within a pilot within a pilot, because each of the sites just has very, very unique characteristics, and we're taking different approaches for each of the sites. So our mobility hubs, the way that we're designing them, and I'll talk more about that in a second, can feature services that can include electric vehicle car sharing, as well as supporting infrastructure, charging infrastructure, bike share, scooter share, looking into TNC ride share credits, understanding how to kind of deepen access to existing public transportation and also make that affordable. And all of those services will be coupled with kind of tailored outreach and education. So we aren't just deploying these services or kind of expanding these services and not providing supplemental outreach and education that's really like rooted in the community so that it's adaptable by all of the sites that we're working with. In terms of the goals of the project, it is really to increase access for low-income residents and disadvantaged communities to some of these essential services that was mentioned in the previous presentation. So how do we help residents? First, acknowledging that residents in these communities are getting around already, right? And so like understanding how we can enhance that and make that better. And so that's really our primary goal, our #1 goal. Also to provide tailored clean mobility options. So not, again, just providing the same mix of strategies at each of the sites, but really providing tailored options. And I'll talk more in a second about how we're doing that tailoring. And by nature, by doing the first 2, obviously reducing GHG and criteria pollutants, to think about what does vehicle ownership look like in these communities, and how do we reduce vehicle miles traveled. And also just, it says here, reduce transportation costs for residents, but I think also access and really deepening the connectivity between the existing services that are in place for these communities. In terms of partnerships and how the site is, or excuse me, how the project is structured, our project team is Transform, MTC, and actually SUMC, in which we have worked closely to think through the design of the actual project. Partners, you can see on the far right here is that we have a project advisory committee, which is a pretty diverse group of advisors that really guide the implementation, but also sustainability, and to really understand how can we connect existing services that can really complement the mobility hub effort that we're trying to do in these disadvantaged communities. So our project advisory committee consists of public partners, we have Department of Transportation Services, we have equity advisors, the list goes on, I'm blanking. Transit companies, and as we start to get further into implementation, we see having private mobility vendors also on that advisory board. Today, although I'll focus on our community partnerships, and those include our site level teams and also site coordinators, and I'll talk about what their role has been in helping us design mobility hubs for each of the sites. So community partnerships. This is all pre-COVID, right? Some of the racial injustice kind of events that have happened in this year. And so this is an image here of a community meeting that has taken place several times, again, pre-COVID, with what we call our site level teams. And this is a group of resident advisors, about 10 to 12 at each site, who really are responsible for ground truthing our effort and what we're doing. They help us design this project, help understand what the mobility options should look like, what they should be. And we really value their expertise, their lived experience, their knowledge, and their vision, and consider them a key partner. They're definitely compensated for their time, and they really help us understand how to do this, as well as all of the other partners, right? That's required to do this. Site level teams are also will be responsible for outreach when the mobility hub services are in place. So to really be that connector between residents who live in these communities, right, and the larger community. And so helping us ensure that these services are adaptable. And again, just like ground truthing the services, just in general. And they're just I call them our champions. It's one of the best parts of the project for me, is being able to work very closely with each of these site level teams. So this is a picture of how we've engaged site level teams now virtually. This looks a little different, obviously. So what you see here is wonderful faces, right, of various community members from our site, some city partners, Transform staff. And I just want to highlight that this project, one of the reasons why we've taken our time, it's now been 2 years, is that we really want to root this in the community. And so we really want to make sure that when it comes to participating in the design of mobility hubs, we want to minimize any participation barriers. And so this is an image, what you see is all of us on the screen, but on the back end, what you don't see is that we had live interpretation going on. We had a different Zoom line going on for childcare. We hosted training sessions. So we really we do value these residents' opinions and their input on this project, but we also want to make sure that they're able to participate during this time. So just wanted to highlight kind of one way in which we are involving the communities to help shape the design and really imagine what mobility hubs can look like at affordable housing developments. Another aspect in how we are really thinking about the community before we start to implement any services is that Transform, MTC, and SUMC conducted a community transportation needs assessment. It's a mouthful, but the title is pretty much self-explanatory. And the purpose really there was in conducting this assessment was to take a step back, first understand what are some of the existing transportation challenges that residents are experiencing in the moment, what's working for them. So also understanding that not everything is a challenge, like not everything is broken, and really trying to highlight that. And to help us really tailor, right, the results from this needs assessment has helped us tailor the implementation plan for each of the sites. It's really an opportunity to empower residents to help shape transportation planning, something that's often not done in these particular communities. So it allows them this opportunity to do that. This survey took us a while, but it was, again, we developed it with our site level teams. They reviewed draft surveys, they took the surveys. In several of our sites, they were the ones actually going out and administering the surveys, helping with data collection, helping with data entry, really helping with capacity building with a lot of our site partners, and also just providing an opportunity for workforce development. So we were able to hire and pay a lot of the residents who helped during this process. And the results really have informed and shaped how we now are implementing the services or plan to implement the services. I'll just highlight a few key findings, as I'm sure I'm running out of time to talk a lot, is that, we found that residents in all of the services that potentially are available, they're most interested in help me afford public transportation, help me get to public transportation. So Clipper Cash and AC Transit passes are one of those options to help kind of increase affordability of public transportation. Also, residents were really interested in Lyft and Uber rides. And then obviously there were some not obviously, but what we learned through this process is there were definitely safety concerns with some of these options. And so we are, using the results to kind of bake that into how we deliver these services. Bike sharing e-scooters was a less popular option. That doesn't mean we're not trying to administer these services at each of the mobility hubs, but we see this as an opportunity to build community awareness, to get community members involved. And also something that's not present is these services were not in a lot of these communities just currently, right? And so a part of this project is, well, obviously people aren't gonna necessarily be as interested in these services if they're not there. So we are working with private vendors to really extend the access to these services in these disadvantaged communities. I'll save kind of some more results, but they're here. There's also a report that's available if people are interested. As you can see here, a majority of residents in each of our sites were really interested in public transportation. Residents are interested in car sharing, despite not really having access to car sharing at each of these sites. And so with that though, with this interest, we found that a lot of residents actually do not have driver's license. So although they might be interested, there is a significant portion, 50 to 75% at each of our sites who do not have driver's license. And so what does a car sharing service look like for a mobility hub where potentially a large portion of residents cannot actually legally drive the cars, right? So we are thinking about ways to address this. What does it mean to have an ambassador program here? In more ways, but these are some of the barriers and challenges that came about this needs assessment process that are now helping us inform how we do implementation. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. We also discovered that several of the residents at each of our sites either unbanked or do not use a smartphone regularly. We know that for a lot of the mobility services right now, they require smartphone access as well as access to a debit or a credit card. And so really, as we start to work more with mobility vendors, we are advocating for the use of these services in a different way. So what does it mean to have cash payments at some of our sites? How do we figure out a way for residents to use the services if they don't have access to a credit card? Can things like just other kind of entities provide for that? So I'll wrap this up just in terms of our project implementation plan and where we are right now. So now that the needs assessment is complete, we really are thinking about how to implement the services that meet the residents' needs as identified in the process that I just explained. We are continuing to have ongoing site level team meetings, although they look a lot different right now. We are continuing our ongoing engagement with public-private partners, understanding some of the challenges in implementing some of the services. I'll just highlight, I think, a challenge and something hopefully that's discussed in the breakout session is as you start to provide more services to disadvantaged communities, communities that historically have had lack of infrastructure, they're not necessarily ready for the implementation of EV infrastructure, right? So there's a lot of site upgrades that need to happen that are in order for us to actually provide electric vehicle charging and some of these services. And that's something that I'm super thankful we've been able to kind of advocate for and use our grant funds for, is to actually say that we not only need to provide the services, but we need to do a lot of site upgrades so that these sites are actually ready for some of the electrification services that are needed to implement mobility hubs. Oh, actually, I have a couple more slides. Few wins in during COVID. This is why I have that here, because COVID hit. I was like, oh yeah, this project is not sure what's going to happen. We were able to deploy a few bikes with Lyft here at one of our sites, and also we are now working with Envoy, which is an electric vehicle car share program, to deliver car share services in one of our sites, and more. I'm out of time, I'm sure. Here's my contact information. Definitely can talk more during the breakout sessions.
Thank you very much, Joy. And we are a little bit behind schedule. We appreciate everybody staying with us for a few minutes. So next we're gonna hear from Rebecca Karbaumer from the city of Bremen in Germany. It's gonna be very exciting. Thank you, Rebecca, for joining us late evening for you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be invited today. Sorry for the late joining. What we figured out is that daylight savings time ended in Germany last weekend, whereas in the United States it ends this coming weekend. So that's why discrepancy now. Presentation mode, there we go. The city of Bremen has over 17 years of experience with mobility hubs. And I just wanted to briefly start with, do you know where Bremen is? For those of you who don't, there's lots of Bremens in the United States. I live and work in Bremen and work for the city of Bremen in Germany. So just to the north of Germany, just about 100 miles southwest of the city of Hamburg. And the city of Bremen is a really compact city located near the North Sea. Beautiful historical city center and very compact urban structure, and that's reflected in the modal split of the residents here. Only 36% of daily trips are done by using a privately owned car. The rest are done on foot, by bicycle, and by using public transport. However, we have still a very high rate of car ownership here. The city has 567,000 inhabitants approximately, and we have about half as many cars in the city. And it's in a compact European city environment. It's a huge problem because the available urban space just can't handle that amount of cars. And that's why, or one of the reasons why we plan mobility hubs, is because mobility hubs help us deal with that spatial issue and improve resource and space efficiency in cities. The city space in European cities is a very scarce commodity. Roads are made for access to living areas, and those roads are now dominated by cars, which creates a safety issue in the neighborhoods as well. Obviously, quite clearly, we're also looking at improving air quality and reducing greenhouse gas emissions in our urban centers, and improving social inclusion and accessibility for people of all ages, whether that's very young people all the way to the best agers, to allow them to be mobile throughout the city almost their entire lives. And the quality of life. There are a lot of other purposes or uses that you can use that urban space or public space for other than parking. And I've just got a quick map review of the city of Bremen. There are over 100 car sharing stations in Bremen, and a third of them are mobility hubs. So car sharing stations linked to other transport modes in the public realm. And our goal really is to reduce the distance between the mobility hubs to a maximum of 300 yards between each station. So all those blue dots you see right there are mobility hubs. At the moment, we have 43 mobility hubs in total, and 10 of them are these large hubs, we call them Mobilpunkte, that we started with in 2003. These larger hubs link car sharing to public transport, to cycling infrastructure and cycling parking, and other community services like recycling services, taxis, clothes donation. In the future, we're thinking of including like cargo packaging. In 2013, we started also with smaller hubs called Mobilpunktchen with 2 to 3 car share vehicles, really in the neighborhoods where the daily journeys start, and as a real alternative to the privately owned car. Because you can see at the modal split that we have, very low car usage in the city. It means that people don't necessarily need a car for their daily journeys to work, but ownership is high, and therefore car sharing plays an important role. Also with helping us deal with those transport issues and too many cars for the available space. In a study we did a few years ago, we found out that one car sharing car in the city of Bremen replaces 16 privately owned cars in the city, which is also sort of legitimizes our strategy for investing public money to support car share services. Because of that added public benefit, because car sharing helps us regain public street space. At the time when we did the study, we had more than 15,000 car share users in the city of Bremen, and we were able to get more than 5,500 cars off the street. That number is much higher now as well. We're very proud of that effect. And when I was invited to this event, I was asked to maybe include a few site selection criteria when we're looking for locations for mobility hubs. We always ask ourselves or define points that are very important to us for the success of the mobility services as well as the community. And things like visibility and accessibility of the site are really important. Are they located in safe spaces? Are they located where journeys start? Use services are more effective when they're there where the journeys start rather than where people want to go, because they'll use those transport modes more likely to use those transport modes, just like the privately owned car, if they're right in front of their door. We also look at, how is it possible to link to other modes of transport, like public transport, bike sharing, cargo bikes, so on and so forth, long distance and local passenger services, but things like population density and business density, and how they can provide a business case for those services so that they don't require public subsidies, and so on and so forth. But the most important question I find to ask when planning a mobility hub, or even before starting, is what do you actually want to achieve? And is the mobility hub the right tool to achieve those goals? In our case, we want to reduce the number of privately owned cars in the city, and mobility hubs with a strong focus on car sharing helps us do that. So last quick summary, the benefits of mobility hubs for us in the city of Bremen and for many European cities who are implementing this now is that mobility hubs allow us to increase the visibility and accessibility of shared and sustainable transport modes. And it helps us provide tailored solutions to meet community needs and to support our overarching transport policies that are laid out in our Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan. And by creating the Mobilpunkt branding, which is the mobility hub brand that Bremen has been working under since 2003, we've really been able to drum up public and political support and increase the visibility of shared transport modes. And along with that, branding of the mobility hub itself, the Mobilpunkt brand, that branding has also been really important in our communication strategies toward the public. And there's one set of communication strategies or approaches that works really well with stakeholders and public decision makers. And then there's the public and the end users. And many years ago, we created this figure, UDO, which stands for Use It, Don't Own It. And we've been really consistent with marketing for car sharing and mobility hubs through billboards and various postcard campaigns, but also through like ads and video spots. And now I brought a short video clip to share, but since we didn't have a chance to test it in advance, what I'll do is simply share the link to the YouTube video with you in the chat after my presentation. It's 63 seconds. Maybe you can have a chance to watch it during the break. And then to those, if you are keen to come visit Bremen and go on a virtual cycling tour, there's another link to share with you, and you can go on in a compact 30 minutes, cover a lot of ground with me, and I'll take you through Bremen and show you mobility hubs and interesting cycling infrastructure. So it will be almost like being here, but not quite. Right. So if you have more questions about details and strategies and lessons learned, I'm really happy to share in the breakout session with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thanks to all of our panelists for today. I know that it's super challenging to try to fit so much content and experience in such a short time. We're aware that all these discussions and lessons learned are worth full day workshops, and we're planning to continue these conversations during the 2021 Shared Mobility Summit. But for today's event, we did plan to have a brief Q&A session, and that we're gonna launch now. I appreciate everybody who submitted questions through the chat box. I'm gonna summarize 3 questions that are relevant for all 5 presenters, and I will ask you to please provide like a short answer to all 3, and so we have enough time to move next to the breakout room sessions and discussion where we can discuss more in depth particular questions. So I'm gonna invite the speakers to turn your cameras on, and the 3 questions that I will ask you to address are: 1, you may already mention this, but what are the funding sources for your projects, like the main funding sources? 2nd, what efforts were made to receive input from people with disabilities, and how the physical challenged individuals have been accommodated in your project? So, and the 3rd one is, what's the role of local transit agencies and how you coordinated with them for this project? So funding, accommodating, receiving input and accommodating people with disabilities, and the role and interaction with your local transit agencies. And again, I'm gonna emphasize how much I appreciate you keeping this brief as well as the presentations. I know we can speak about this forever, so let's make it fit into this event format. And I'm gonna start with Sharon.
Okay. I think actually we should go to the projects that are current projects right now, and I'm happy to talk about this, but I was showing examples of stuff from a while ago, it was a patchwork of funding through a variety of sources to make this happen. And I think that is what happens with there's funding that's available to electrification, And there's, money that can be used for transit innovation, and and they're private providers who, may want to sign up for things. So it's really that mix, and that's part of why the partnership aspect is so essential. But I think, yeah.
Great. Thank you. So Danielle, let you go next.
Yeah, am I just doing the funding or am I running through all of them quickly? We're starting with funding.
Well, all quickly if you can.
Okay. So like Sharon said, it's really a patchwork for planning. We've been relying on Caltrans planning grants through our State Department of Transportation. And also we've gotten a grant through the Federal Transit Administration to do our Mid-Coast Mobility Hub planning. They have a similar grant out right now through the TOD planning that's available currently. And then for implementation, we're going to do some alphabet soup here. We are using our RSTP for flexible fleet pilots, looking to use CMAQ funding for, the shared streets initiatives and some of these other kind of small scale improvements. Looking towards applying to ATC MTD, which is available every year, and then really looking to what's in the new Federal Transportation Reauthorization Act. We keep hearing that there's going to be more about new mobility and innovation. So figuring out how we can leverage that, but kind of just tracking all these grants and then working on partnerships with developers and, the jurisdictions and trying to pull things from everywhere. For senior and disabled involvement, one of the projects I didn't talk about was a project in Chula Vista, which is in our region directly south of the city of San Diego. We're developing a concept of operations for a mobility hub there. And one of the things that we're highlighting is access, because that area has a higher senior, disabled, veteran, underbanked, unbanked, and low-income population than the rest of the county. And so figuring out how we can have equitable access to all of these groups, to these new modes of transportation, and a lot of features and amenities that are really reliant on technology that might not be currently accessible to all those groups. So working through a concept of operations to figure out how we can accommodate those users. And we did a survey, focus groups, executive interviews of the different kind of nonprofits and social service agencies in that area to really get an idea of what people were concerned about and how we can meet their needs. And we did this during COVID and had a great response. Really exceeded all of our expectations of involvement even before the pandemic. So that was really great. And what we found is across the board, safety was everybody's biggest concern, regardless of, what their age, population group were, but it mattered even more to people that were senior and disabled. So we're kind of weeding that out to make sure that we address safety throughout. And then finally, the role of the transit agency. The way that we view mobility hubs is really, we have the area and then the transit station is always kind of like the node of the mobility hub. We're trying to improve access to our frequent high-speed transit in the region. But we do have, and there was a comment in the comment box, and I responded quite lengthy to it. But we have, for choice riders particularly, a big culture of kind of park and ride at transit stations right now, and there is constrained capacity at all of our stations. So we have to work together closely to figure out how we can repurpose, the capacity at the stations for other uses. So there's, a lot of different kind of interests at play. Luckily, we have great relationships with our transit agencies, and we're always working together to identify, where we should be prioritizing mobility hubs and how we can repurpose the space. But, it's always challenging discussions and lots of fun problem solving.
Thanks. Jasna?
Yeah, so going with the hodgepodge theme of funding, we also rely on several funding sources, especially since this is still a pilot. So we've had support from American Cities Climate Challenge, Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, as well as NACTO. And I think right now we're at these crossroads where it's not sustainable to always be trying to looking for money. So that's where we want to develop a long-term funding program and capital program and really work closely with our transit agency to identify which elements of these hubs our transit agency would be kind of in charge of and which one the city would lead on. In terms of working with people with disabilities and the elderly, when we started the pilot last year, we took it to an advisory committee here at the city that advises the mayor and is composed of people living with disabilities. And a lot of the feedback that we received was mainly concerns around scooter and some of these elements blocking their way. So that's where we worked with the private companies for this year's contracts to incorporate the Lock 2 mechanisms and really making sure that all of these elements are creating clear zones. So that's something that we'll continue to work with that group. And we've also identified through mobility hubs, but also in our 10-year transportation action plan, or working with private companies to bring in more modes that are adaptable to people that have disabilities. And one last thing, with the smart locker pilot, we're right now in discussions with our library services to see how we can provide access to their patrons who may not feel safe going inside a building, such as the elderly who are at risk. And then the last one, our role of local transit agency, we work very closely together. We work with the mobility manager over there who's working on a regional network of mobility hubs, and we actually meet on a monthly basis to talk about this and coordinate on the work, not just the data. We collect data from for evaluation to see whether mobility hubs are having an impact on bus ridership, but we're also working with them to see what is needed through our engagement or these elements that we can test now that can inform a regional network. So I would say that's one aspect that is very important, is just having that close relationship and having those check-ins on a regular.
Great, thanks for keeping it short. Joy?
Might be even shorter, as this is a super small scale pilot. In terms of funding sources, our main source is from the California Air Resources Board, who provides funding for California projects really focused on delivering clean mobility options in disadvantaged communities. So if you're in California, definitely encourage you to check that out, CARP. We also just pulled together, I think, other funding sources and also thinking through existing rebate programs that are available for public utilities in terms of, as we're working with affordable housing developers, how do we help make sure that this is sustainable, these services are sustainable? And so really working with public utilities and understanding their rebate programs that are available for that as well. In terms of our efforts with the senior population and those with physical disabilities, I will just speak on the senior population first. Our site level teams are pretty representative of each of our sites. And so we have people from various demographics, ethnicity, just everything, right? And so we really rely on their expertise and their input on how to really tailor the services for seniors. One of our sites, we have an entire senior affordable housing development, and they are definitely represented in those meetings and helping us guide how do we make sure seniors don't want to be on scooters, right? So what are mobility services for seniors? Those with physical disabilities, I think everyone spoke on this already, or some people spoke on this already, but we really rely on our city partnerships, and a lot of our cities have various working groups that work on this. And so we essentially are merging our efforts and our learnings and access with that, as well as with private companies. Our work with local transportation agencies. I mentioned in my presentation that we are trying to provide discounted transit passes for a lot of our sites. So there is a lot of collaboration with our, I would just say 2 of our local bus companies here and more. And we realize that this is something residents for the sites that we're working on really rely on public transportation, right? So how do we further connect that residents to that? So we have no choice but to work with transportation agencies in that way, and really data sharing. So sharing information that we've received from our needs assessment as we further engage residents, as well as with public transportation agencies as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Joy. And last, Rebecca, if you want to share.
I think same as in many cases, funding comes from a lot of different sources. In our case, EU grant funding, federal funding, but also municipal revenue that we generate through the renting of out of the car share parking bays. That allows us to bring in some of the costs we use for investments. The role of the public transport agencies and the mobility hubs is obviously a partnership, a communication partner, but it's the municipality as such that plans and implements the mobility hubs. And the public transport provider doesn't have a larger role there other than viewing themselves as being as a supplement or being complemented by the mobility hubs. And then the last question, how do we involve people with disabilities? The needs of physically and visually impaired individuals is part of the basic design element of the mobility hubs. And the mobility hubs that we implement we always use to carry out general infrastructure improvements. So this barrier-free access, tactile elements is always a component, and obviously we get fed back the needs from the local district parliaments about very particular issues. So I would say it's a component of every single plan and mobility hub we design.
Great. Well,
I just, before you wrap this up, I just wanted to add one other thing just for people to think about. And that is that often transit agencies own land, they have sites, senior housing has properties, and to think about the assets that can be a part of these projects. It may not be a grant or cash, but it might be that the partnerships or a local business that would benefit by turning their parking lot, for example, into a hub. So thinking about sort of what can be contributed to these projects is also another way to further their development, and also to be located in a way that will bring a community and engage people in the planning of it.